pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, just before we get started, a little housekeeping. Tornado sirens go off.
Yeah.
There's some conference rooms in this general direction that we can all huddle into and make sure we're all safe. All right, Board, I'd like a motion to approve the agenda for March 14th, 2024 as presented.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Ayes have it. All right, now we're up to some bond project recommendations. I will turn it over to Ms. Embry and Mr. Spencer.
Actually, Dr. Rompus will start us off.
I'll get us started and turn it over to them. So good evening, Board. Thank you for allowing us this special meeting tonight. We're here to discuss with you potential next steps and ultimately what we're hoping is a recommendation for the remaining bond project funds from Prop S. As you're aware, this has been an ongoing process and discussion to develop the recommendation. We knew following the increased costs of Francis Howell North that it would ultimately impact our ability as a district to complete all of the remaining work that was listed on the original scope that was provided to our community back when the bond issue was approved during the 2019-20 school year. You might recall that back during the fall of 2022, we held a citizen roundtable to gather input, and that was less about ranking the remaining projects, but talking about what criteria we might use in making those decisions. We then had Mr. Stutzer join our team on July 1st of this year. And while his first priority was really learning and leading the day-to-day operations of the Facilities and Maintenance Department and jumping in on the North project, he was then able to move into understanding the scope of the bond project work, reviewing the deferred maintenance and life cycle replacement needs of the district with his team, interacting with our building administrators, and then ultimately working with some third parties to provide input on both cost, potential cost, and then the scope of the work that we needed to do. And so all of that has then led to us sharing this update with you tonight and engaging in a conversation about the next steps, with our hope being that we would bring a recommendation to you next week. And that really would be just approving moving forward with the work. You know that the board will continue to receive updates and recommendations for each of the individual projects, but want to get your input on moving forward overall with the work. So the format is that I'll just talk through what's in your packet, the initial list that we had, and remind you of that. Ms. Embry will then provide an update on the bond funding through actually the end of last month, where we're at with the remaining funds. And then Mr. Stutzer will talk through the work that has been completed, work that you've already approved that is in process or upcoming, and then our initial recommendation for the remaining funds. And then we'll open it up for discussion around those next steps to get the boards. So you have a packet in front of you that we will talk through tonight, and this will be posted to board docs following the meeting. Page 2 really it's just the official ballot language that ultimately led to the approval of the adjusted debt service levy, providing for the issuance of the general obligation bonds. What's then provided on pages 3 through 8, and I'm not going to go through it, but it's really the anchor document. So you'll remember back when the community was asked to support Prop S, there was a list of projects that was published and shared at each of the buildings. This is the initial one. So pages 3 through 5 were communicated as, or 3 through 6 is phase 1, and then 7 and 8 were communicated as phase 2. There are several iterations of these documents that are out there, just as they were created, as they were shared. We believe this to be what we would say is the most accurate, in the sense that the subtotal that you see here is just under the $244 million that was ultimately approved by the community. When we get to the point of talking through this, why I said it's an anchor document is we do know that there's an expectation that people approve what was listed here. So ultimately, have these projects been completed? Are they going to be completed? If they're not, why? And so we wanted to tie back to that to provide clarity for you as well as the community as we move forward. I'll also remind you, and this needs to be a recurring message throughout this, is that these were all estimates. And these estimates were put on paper back in 2018 and 2019 following that initial facilities master plan. We know that these numbers have changed, as well as a lot of the things that listed here, and Mr. Stutzer will speak to this, were just listed as things at each building. So the idea of grass renovation or parking lot work. While in some cases there was clear work that needed to be done. In some cases, it was just life cycle replacement work that we anticipated needing, and that was put on the list. Why that's important is when we talk about the next steps in the recommendation, that's why some of the projects are not moving forward. Mr. Stutzer and his team, as they've worked through this, have realized or identified that there were some things listed that have either been completed or don't need to be completed at this time. So I will turn things over first to Ms. Embry, who will talk through page 9, which is the summary of the financial data.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rumpus. So I have added line numbers so that you can easily follow along as I reference the information before you. This financial one-page document is similar to that which we have posted in the past under regular financial reports for our board meetings. And so if you note on line 1, that indicates our earnings from investments through February 29 at $7.673 million. That's since the first funds were received for the bond issues, each of the 2 phases. And then the second line, it's also revenue code 5141 per the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, but that is the specific value of the bond premiums at $34.757 million. And then the third line represents the actual sale of the bonds, the $243,915,926.11. Our total revenue then is line 4 at $286.346 million. Then we move to the expenditures, and that includes the bond fees that were associated with issue of $1,557,000, and then the bond projects themselves. So on line 6, where those expenditures are listed, I want to pause for just a moment and help you understand that that would include some of the costs that have been incurred so far relative to Fairmount Design or Henderson Design. So it can include some of the projects in process or in progress that we're working on. So the total spent as of February 29th was $175,891,454. Then we move forward. Lines 8 through 15 represent that which is encumbered in Skyward, which is our financial software. And each of those projects are broken out. You can see, again, there are some encumbrances for Fairmont and Henderson. And an encumbrance is simply a purchase order, or it's an obligated commitment in the system that has been secured for the purpose of paying for expenditures. Once the accounts payable check is cut, then that encumbrance gets reduced down, and then it appears under the expenditure lines. So the grand total then, adjusted encumbered, which includes the contingency return of $2,060,000, on line 15 is $24,781,145. Revenues less expended or encumbered, line 16, equals $85,674,382. So then as we move further down to bond commitments, we have the remaining hold for the Francis Howell North furniture, fixtures, and equipment on line 17, just under $600,000. Our arbitrage estimate is line 18, and that's just under $2 million. And recall that that is that amount that we'll need to return. Basically, the rule is, I presented on this during board meetings, that we cannot make more than the people or patrons or businesses whomever purchased those bonds when they were sold. We can't make more interest than what they're earning. And the interest rates have been very robust since the bond issue occurred. So, and that's an IRS rule, and so we will be compliant with that. So the unallocated remaining balance then arrives at $83,113,000 on line 20. Now we get to the bond projects in process, and so again, when you think of Henderson and Fairmount having some expenditures or encumbrances up above in those areas I noted, the remaining amount for those projects based on the total that we know them to be today. We have our remaining security work of $1,761,846, the Henderson Elementary renovation of just over $16.6 million, Fairmount Elementary renovation $7.328 million, and that represents then the total projects in process. The remaining balance for future recommendations, and this is the primary focus for this evening, line 25, $57,419,491. So grand total $57,419,491. And of course, I have an asterisk noting that the Henderson and Fairmount are pending Board of Education approval. That concludes the financial portion. Are there any questions about that?
Yeah, I have one. I recall you're mentioning, I recall you're mentioning at the one meeting that we had to spend the prop funds by a certain time.
Right.
So, because I'm a shopper and everything, I need to know how soon do we have to spend this 57 million? I mean, I know we're here tonight to discuss it, but.
It's a great question. It will be covered on page 17 of the documents. However, I'll just tell you, it's March 31 of 2025.
Okay.
That's our deadline for spending 85% of phase two.
So within a year?
Yes.
Okay.
So we do have some intentionality that we need to address.
And move forward. Okay, great, thank you.
That's a great question, though. Okay, so then if you turn the page, we're now on page 10, and so the way these have been categorized, as Dr. Rompus indicated, we had that one iteration of both phase 1 and phase 2 that were your pages earlier. That, if you count those lines, there are 151 lines of projects. And those are multiple lines per building, potentially, but all of that is then represented in these upcoming charts that you'll see on pages 11 through 15. And so they are categorized as following. First, the projects that are completed. Those were mostly completed using bond funds. There was one notation where at a particular elementary building, the HVAC was funded with regular capital dollars. Those represent 35 different projects. The second page will be bond projects in progress, and you are well aware of those projects, but we'll cover those a little more in detail as we journey forward. The next page, page 12, is recommended projects for bond fund utilization, and we have 29 lines listed here. Page 13 is recommended projects for future resource utilization, whether that be capital or other resources that are identified, and there are 32 items on that. Projects requiring further evaluation, there are 17 lines or projects listed on that. And then the last page is the no longer needed or recommended, and those are represented in 26 different project lines. So now we will turn it over to Mr. Stutzer, and he will help us understand the variety of projects in the different categories.
Thank you, Kara. Good evening, Board. Before I jump into the specific recommendations that we'll make for your consideration this evening, I do want to first acknowledge our third parties. As you can imagine, this has been quite a task, working with different third parties out there to get a lot of information, both financial, also site visits. And so that's been part of the reason that it's taken a little bit to gather all the information, digest it, and be able to bring forward some potential recommendations. Additionally, I want to acknowledge our internal operation team. As Dr. Rumpus obviously noted, I started July 1, and so there was quite a bit of work that had taken place there, and appreciate our internal operations team for providing a lot of the detailed background information that will help in our discussion this evening. So first I want to talk about playgrounds. We had a third party perform a comprehensive review of all of our elementary playgrounds, and they noted quite a few deficiencies and inequities across our district. There's a lot of lack of ADA access to many structures. We've got drainage issues and age appropriateness. Additionally, there are several play structures that pose safety hazards due to damaged pieces that are obsolete, and those replacement pieces can't be sourced. So that is one recommendation that we'll bring forward for you for consideration. Also had a third party perform a comprehensive HVAC life cycle. They were able to assess all of our mechanical systems at our instructional sites, and allowed us to really prioritize what that life cycle replacement might look like. The systems identified in our recommendation have been in service 25-plus years. Parts are obsolete and or inefficient, and from an energy utilization standpoint. Additionally, the district would realize significant savings should the board choose to move the recommendation forward. We'd realize approximately about $280,000 annually in energy savings, just from updating controls and also equipment. And then we engaged with Ameren. Our district has two electric providers, River River and Ameren. And so we engaged Ameren for many of the sites that they cover. And we'd be eligible for about a $952,000 rebate as part of their energy conservation program, should the board choose to move forward on the HVAC life cycle recommendation. Also for consideration, Francis Howell baseball field. Right now, the district spends about $35,000 annually to simply convert that field back and forth from softball to baseball. And that cost is going to increase, I can tell you that, as we move forward. And so our recommendation there would be to turf baseball field, which would provide really a versatile facility that can withstand the consistent traffic that we see, but also support the instruction and co-curricular programs at that particular site. Next, I want to talk about Francis Howell High, a wrestling and multi-purpose space, and visiting with the team there and the leadership team, as well as the activities director. Currently, they don't have adequate space for instructional offerings and co-curricular programming. This addition would accommodate the wrestling program during wrestling season, but also provide a space for daily physical education classes and co-curricular practice, such as cheer, dance, band, drumline, among other programs. Right now, what they're having to do is really get creative with their schedules, and oftentimes they're having to displace another program in order to accommodate those programs that were shared. Also staying at Francis Howell High, the current tennis courts there, they were built in, I believe, 2011. They're just really in poor shape. There's a lot of buckling, large cracks, voids under the subgrade, ponding of water on the surface. These courts have been in service for approximately 13 years. From a life cycle standpoint, asphalt really has a life cycle of about 8 years, respective to tennis courts, and so we're past that, and you can see some of the issues when we visit the site in terms of the buckling, cracking, and the voids in the subgrade. And then at Francis Howell Central and Francis Howell High, those auditoriums are in need of renovation. Many components in those spaces are not conducive, nor do they support some of the performing arts program functions. Parts are broken and obsolete, and both facilities really require modernization in order to support student needs. I do, however, want to note original plans specific to Francis Howell High was to construct a new auditorium storm shelter. However, just due to the cost of the construction cost of putting up a storm shelter and the available financial resources, our recommendation is to perform basic cosmetic renovations in both those spaces, but it's more specific to Francis Howell High, since the original recommendation was to construct a storm shelter. Now, I know the question there is, well, do we have safe spaces for refuge? We do. We do have a lower level, garden level, where we can accommodate most of the student body in the event that there is inclement weather and demolition of the C building. We'd recommend demolishing that building. It used to house the high school alternative programs and also our district learning center. However, with this building, obviously both those programs were relocated, and the alternative high school is housed on the second floor here, and the district learning center is on the third floor. And currently, right now, we're spending financial resources to heat and cool that space, and it's in disrepair, and therefore we're recommending demolishing it. and converting the space it currently occupies into green space. As part of that demo, very similar to what we're going to undertake at Francis Howell North, asbestos testing as well as other waste will need to be performed prior to that building coming down, with your approval to move forward. Also want to talk about our transportation facility. Our transportation department operates 163 buses. Our current bus maintenance facility is inadequate. It lacks the size and the storage to be able to store many of the parts necessary to do preventative maintenance and also repairs. Also lacks the electrical capacity to perform just daily task frequencies required to maintain our bus fleet of 163 buses. What that results to is our mechanics frequently perform preventative maintenance in inclement weather. They're unable to store all the necessary parts, so they're having to do a lot of running around town to source parts necessary to perform their work. And also just, performing that work in inclement weather, obviously poses a safety risk there as well. Additionally, on that site, our fueling station does not have a canopy, and that exposes our fuelers to safety risks, slips, trips, and falls, and which obviously during inclement weather increases our likelihood for work comp claims. And additionally, as part of that scope, we have our original fueling island, our dispensers. The actual gas pumps, those are original to that facility, and they've met their life cycle and need to be replaced. It's the comprehensive recommendation for our transportation facility. And then lastly, we've got a placeholder. I want to talk about safety and security. We've got a $2 million placeholder for that. Obviously, there's been conversations via the District Safety Task Force that we hope some recommendations will come out of that task force in terms of some projects to move forward. I know we met about a month or so ago, and so we're still anticipating some projects to come out of there. And then any remaining funds would be utilized to address a variety of safety initiatives across the district, such as security film, additional cameras and recording servers, as well as fencing around some of our elementary sites. So, that concludes kind of the recommendations that we intend to make this evening for your consideration. Be more than happy to answer any questions before we move on.
I do wonder if it would be helpful to go page by page, just to see if there were questions in that way. Okay. So I mentioned there were 35 completed projects. Are there any questions about any of that Mr. Stutz would be happy to answer?
You say these are completed, are they closed out and done, or are they in progress? Oh, never mind, next one's in progress. These are done, closed out. Okay. Question on that part? Move it on.
Mr. Sumter. You had mentioned the demolition of Building C at front, and you had also mentioned Francis Howell North. And am I not seeing what that demolition would be for Francis Howell North, or was that included in the original package?
Yeah, that's a great question. It was included. The demolition of the existing Francis Howell North is part of the board-approved construction manager at-risk contract that the board's already approved.
So we know that it's going to be destroyed. If you like that with the, looking at that, so that we've already, I must say, we've already paid for that already.
That is correct. My
Okay.
point in referencing Francis Howell North is really to make the board aware that as part of that work that will take place there's special testing that needs to take place, and I know that's always a question in our community, that are we doing our due diligence in terms of special testing before we demo buildings.
So we don't have to worry about
Yeah, they're-
that being on this list?
That is
Okay,
correct.
thank you.
I have a question about the demolition of C building as well. A little while back, I was contacted by several local law enforcement municipalities about, it was kind of an odd conversation. They asked me if we had anywhere where they could train. I reached out to Jen Joels and said, hey, is there anywhere that this could happen? And put them in touch, and they ended up actually training at that building and doing security sweeps and things like that. They had high value in that particular property, and we're extremely grateful to do it. I wonder if there's any, pathway for that to happen instead of a demolition, only because, it not only provides them with training for situations that we all might hopefully never be in, but it also, provides a security element for that campus. And they held very high value in their ability to train there and really keep them on their toes, because they're not going to do this all the time, but they need to practice constantly. So I wonder if that's been something that you guys have talked about at all, or?
Yeah, I can answer that. I think it's a great question, and you're correct. We do allow some of our first responder partners to utilize that building from time to time. What I'll tell you is we've assessed that building is I've got structural concerns, and that would need to be addressed if the board wished to continue to extend that. But our recommendation would be to not spend any more resources for that specific building and demo it.
If they were to put the bill for that, would that be okay? Is that something that we would consider?
I think that'd be worth a discussion, but I think what would probably drive that is a full comprehensive assessment from a structural standpoint, and what I would probably offer is the cost is going to exceed the benefit.
Right.
And there's also an ongoing cost right now of heating and cooling that building to prevent
Yeah.
mold growth, to make sure the pipes aren't freezing.
Right.
We're spending this for 2 years every once in a while.
Sure.
Training facility.
What are the costs for that, for heating and cooling?
I don't have those right in front of me, but I can certainly put those together and get that to you. In terms of what we've paid, year to date.
I would hate to waste a valuable asset to the community if they can use it for their purposes. We're not using it at all, but they reached back out to me after they were able to do that, and they were just elated. They just said, this is the perfect thing that we need, and we will use this as much as we possibly can if you'll let us. And, I thought it was something that really benefited the community, so maybe we can look into that.
Maybe we can look into also just maybe selling it to them outright, letting them assume all costs, all liability. I mean, I could certainly go into a contract. I have no idea what the building's worth.
What we'll do here is, here in the next week, we'll try to get some cost estimates together.
Yeah.
Hopefully try to get that to you guys sooner rather than later. That way, if you choose to discuss that further, you at least have some information for consideration.
Yeah, might offer as well, but it sounds like there's value both from them and from us, from that partnership there. It's probably less convenient on their part of potentially using a different building during off-school hours or something like that, if that's at all possible, and maybe something else as well.
Okay.
Well, I was thinking, should we ask them if they would be interested in that partnership before we, I don't want to say waste the time at looking for stuff, but maybe we should ask them. I mean, I know that they said it was invaluable, but has anybody even asked them if they would like to, if we didn't demolish it? Would they-
No, this is the first I'm hearing of this, but I'll reach out to them.
Or I think maybe it's a little, Mr. Stutzer could do that for us and see if they're even interested in it.
What I would offer is, I think, let us gather the data first, because that's
Agreed.
really going to drive whether they'd be interested or not. If they're going to assume all the utility costs as well as the construction costs to stabilize that building from a structural standpoint, they may think differently.
Right.
Agreed.
Any additional questions on bond projects and in process?
One question here, Francis South Central, heard some rumblings recently about bleachers needing some renovation or some work. Is that how's that?
That's
It's on
a,
another page.
that's a great question. And so, here we're specifically talking about projects that we would utilize bond dollars for.
Okay.
What you'll see we do have a recommendation to replace those bleachers. We're going to utilize capital dollars and prioritize that through that.
Okay.
And we made a recommendation for your consideration at the March 21st board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, closing our discussion on progress. Let's continue with recommendations.
We're on page 12.
Page 12, recommended projects. Additional questions, conversation board?
You mentioned something about converting baseball fields to some other use as a cost of some dollars per year. I didn't, can you repeat that? I don't remember quite what it was.
I think you said Francis Howell. Didn't you mean Francis Howell Central?
Did I say, I meant Central.
Central,
Yeah,
okay.
Central is where we're currently having to convert the field, Vice President Cook, from softball to baseball, because they play in different seasons.
And as a reminder, that conversion is happening as part of a resolution agreement under the OCR related to a Title IX complaint regarding field accessibility and availability for softball versus baseball. We are being asked to provide ongoing documentation through work orders and other documentation that we're doing it. And while Mr. Stutcher shared, the cost of the turf field versus the $35,000 a year, we anticipate through the vendor that cost is just going to go up each year. We also run the risk in any given year that if we fail to meet that deadline, if weather were to impact grass taking footing, that we would be violating that resolution agreement. So I feel that that's the right move moving forward.
So it was $35,000 a year to do that?
Currently.
Currently, right. On the tennis courts at Francis Howell High, you mentioned they were completed in 2011. And when we worked on the Francis Howell North tennis courts recently, it was discovered there was some older concrete under there. Have we done the same history?
We have not.
So, might be good to do at some point. I guess we would want to make sure we approve it before
We never want to get ahead of the board.
Yeah.
And so as part of any recommendation you approve, we'll do our due diligence to ensure that we don't have any surprises, as we ran into at Francis Howell North. It did end up costing us a little bit more from a demo standpoint.
On the Francis Howell High, with you mentioned the interior of the building can accommodate during a storm.
Mhm.
Said most of the student body, which I raised an eyebrow about.
So I did visit with, and maybe I should have used different terminology, but it can accommodate the student body. Honer designed that building, so I was able to engage with them to ask that specific question, and it was designed with that in mind, down in the garden lower level.
It's okay. And then just last, the building C demolition, conversion to green space. Is that included in the cost estimate that we have for that? Or I don't know if it's just grass or we're going to do green or?
It's just grass.
Okay.
We'd probably just go back with grass seed, our most economical, turning that back to a green space.
I have a question about the bus garage. You said that currently the facility that we have is not big enough. How are we handling that? Yeah.
Well, if anybody a part of the citizens in our school, or not around the table, so they had an opportunity to tour that facility recently. And right now, how we're handling it is we're basically trying to make it work. We can't even pull full buses into the bays to be able to operate on them. About 3/4 of the bus ends up sticking out because the facility's not large enough to be able to pull in a full bus. Only 2 usable bays, and again, as we maintain a fleet of 163 buses, and obviously those are fairly newer at this point in time as that program was brought in-house, but As those buses age, they're going to require more preventative maintenance and repairs. And we currently really can't support those with our current infrastructure there.
Have we thought about, I know we haven't talked about it, but have we thought about possibly the option someday, we may want to take that back outside? How much is this going to cost us, this bus? What would be the return? How long till we would get a return on it?
Just to be clear, are you talking about the whole busing service going back with a third party? That's what, okay.
I know we haven't talked about it, and I'm not proposing that we do at this point. I'm just saying the option is always, since we brought it in, there's always the option that it may prove to be more feasible to take it back out to a third party.
I think, Treasurer Pushkar, we would have to look at that because when we brought it in-house, we ended up saving quite a bit of money. And I think even the $7 million that we would be spending on the Prop S funds to build the garage, we would still be coming out ahead. Okay, I don't know that, because part of that too is then when you do take something like that out third party, then you've also got to worry about, all the other stuff that goes with it.
Two-sided sword.
Correct. So I think if you wanted to look, I would have to go back and look at those numbers again, but I think that it would cover the amount of money we saved was significant.
Okay.
I would imagine as well, the idea of bringing it in-house, we have a little more control over it. Situations
Oh, I
like today,
understand that.
I know that we can go back and look at our process and systems, how things work out at busing, because it's turning into it.
And customer service was as much of a factor as the cost.
Yeah.
At the same time, if for whatever reason, enrollment would drop precipitously. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just preparing for all eventualities.
But those aren't my plans.
Well, I know, not my plans either.
I have a question about the actual bays themselves. You said that the buses are sticking out. With this, I guess, recommendation, how did you come to that? And the reason I ask is because when, for instance, car dealerships, they have bays as well. You work on their vehicles in the bays, and the way that they determine what their profit is based upon bay utilization. A mechanic works 8 hours, but he does 12 hours worth of work. That's the bay utilization. Was that taken into consideration when you, like, are they actually analyzing how these mechanics and the people that are working on the buses are utilizing the bays and how many hours they're turning versus working?
Yeah, so all of that was taken into consideration, Director Ponder. So we worked with a third party to kind of come up with the necessary square footage that would be needed to support a bus fleet of 163 that will be aging here. And what they recommended was a total of 6 bays and the wash bay, which came out to about 10,000 square feet. And based off of the square footage, I believe it was $500 a square foot. That's how we came up with that calculation.
And with these bays, how is that going to be tracked? Are they going to be, again, they're working on these buses in these bays. We have to have an ROI here. And as they're working on these bays, they're working there 8 hours, but how many hours are they actually, for lack of a better term, billing out?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I follow your question.
So, for instance, if they're working 8 hours in these bays, how many buses are they able to work on and get it,
through the rotation?
Yes.
I would offer that we don't have that data with us this evening. I think those are great questions. Of course, these are our own employees who are working on our own buses. And I would say, if anything, we have lost productivity in getting buses back on the road because of potential stacking issues.
That's why I'm asking.
Yes.
Because that type of mentality is how car dealerships and other types of businesses like this become and stay profitable, is by understanding how the bays are utilized and by billing out, they bill out hourly. So if a service department at a car dealership bills out 1.5 hours for the replacement of X part, well, that mechanic can then get paid for that many hours, but then he does it in half that amount of time. So he's actually able to bill out 12 hours in an 8-hour day and get more done. So that's really where the motivation stems inside of a car dealership service department. And that's how, they have what's called a door rate. So a door rate is how much they're going to charge per hour, and you go in and you're paying for 3 hours worth of work, and next thing you know, your car's back in your hands in an hour and 15 minutes. You're like, wait, I paid for 3 hours. Well, no, they got 3 hours worth of work done in an hour and 15 minutes. So you might want to look into how that works and maybe talk to some of the local car dealerships possibly and figure out exactly how it is. I mean, I worked with them for years, so I know exactly what they do. So if you'd like to ask me, I'm happy to help. But it is a very efficient way, and as you know, car dealerships have perfected this type of thing. So it's a very efficient way of actually getting more work done in less time and being more efficient in doing so. So you might want to take a look at it.
We'll certainly take a look at that. What I would also just want to make sure the Board of Education understands is our entire fleet, obviously the Missouri Highway Department comes in, Missouri Patrol. State Patrol comes in and does annual inspections, and so part of this is being able to make sure that I know we're looking at that from a business lens. I would also offer that we also need to look at this from a safety lens, because they do have the ability to remove a large percentage of our fleet if we can't maintain it adequately, and that was the logic behind bringing some of this recommendation forward to you.
But kudos to the transportation team. We've had fantastic reports annually, in spite of these challenges that they managed to overcome, not having the right spaces to do the footing.
And also remind you
We'll
that
certainly dig in on that.
as part of this discussion and a recommendation we'd ask you to approve next week when we come back to our stop sign diagram, this is really just that first stop, and it's the board giving permission to explore. So we're not asking you to approve a 6-bay at this amount. These are estimates based on some of the initial design drawing that's been looked at over the last couple of years, and any projects that we would even explore would always be coming back to the board for approval for updates, through the design process.
I'd like to, for just a second, go back to page 11, one's in progress, Fairmont Elementary. At some point in the past, we had Honer come in and talk to us, and I know I toured Fairmont Elementary, and there was a window pulling away from its frame, which to me means possible structural damage. Honer said at that time, I believe, that they were going to look into it. I haven't heard anything since. Do we know that Fairmont is structurally sound? Has any investigation or any?
Yeah, so right now, Treasurer Pushkar, we do obviously plan to bring a recommendation for Fairmount at a subsequent board meeting, I believe, in April. And based off of the MEP assessments that are being done right now, we do believe Fairmount is structurally sound. Nothing has raised a red flag through some of those reports.
Thank you.
Just going back to these bus garage real quick. You mentioned going from 2 bays to 6. Do we have that many mechanics right now, or if we do that, are we going to have to staff that up? Are we looking at more staffing?
I believe we have 5 mechanics. And so, and you have to remember that while we may have 5 mechanics and we may potentially make a recommendation, they're multitasking. They could be working on multiple buses at one time. So they may be draining transmission fluid from one bus while they're simultaneously fixing a radiator hose on another. So it gives them the ability to multitask.
Another bus garage question. Just curious on location, is that replacing the current garage? Is it being built somewhere else?
We haven't gotten that far. I think one of the things that we would need to do, pending your approval to begin exploring that, would be to assess, a suitable site. But it will either go back where it's at, or we do have some green space around that facility there to be able to, that would fit.
Thank you. Or additional questions on recommended projects? Moving on to recommended projects for future resource utilization. Page 13. Questions here for?
highlighting for you that text at the bottom. So dependent how, which we have on page 16, we'll have the summary of all the project with estimated costs for this recommendation. But the Sager Middle School HVAC is identified as an item that could be shifted to the bond funds if there were available funds. So just that awareness.
So, just so I'm clear, these are, if we were prioritizing these would be kind of this priority 2 after the first list?
Right?
We have enough left. That's correct.
Or for future capital fund staging, year by year.
Besides the issues at ADA for some of the playgrounds, the other district-wide ADA improvements, can you give me an idea of the scope? I mean, how many, like, what besides the playground are you looking at?
Yeah, and so for example, over at Henderson, the board had already approved picking up the alternate. That was obviously to address some ADA needs in buildings. So through some of the course, through some of the projects that the board has already approved, we're addressing a lot of that. ADA also extends into signage such as braille and those things throughout buildings, and so we're addressing those comprehensively through some of those other projects. But ongoing, sidewalks throughout the district. We also have life cycle asphalt, that needs to meet some ADA requirements from a elevation standpoint. So we'll bring those recommendations as we identify and assess those.
Just for my clarification, these, all these different lists, these aren't in any particular order within the sheets, are they?
I sorted them based on the grade range first,
Okay.
then the location second. That last column is referencing back to that original iteration that we provided for you. And other than that, the projects themselves are in whatever order.
So if I'm understanding this right, the recommended projects, you're keeping a $2 million reserve for security, plus you're planning on these projects. Now we got this possible projects. How feasible are these projects as part of the process? When I say these, the recommended projects for future resources.
The way I look at it is these are probably, don't expect these unless we happen to come in under budget on that. These are the first page, page 12, or the page that they're, here's the recommended ones we want to put forward to. Here's things we need to do at some point, when money's there.
I get that. So what I'll also, I guess, want to understand is, we saw what happened with our last planning with the security vestibules. So I guess, in what I hear, did we accurately forecast, or are we even considering that these are a possibility, I guess? In reality, I'm not, how realistic we even get to a page 3 on this, that if I need to come out and say it. Did you really?
Confidence level of.
Yeah.
Page
Do
12.
we have a confidence level getting past page 12? And then we're just keeping page 13 more as, okay, guys, if in the future we're gonna need to raise money for this.
Correct. Page 13, we would not be recommending utilizing Prop S funds for.
Right.
We believe these projects, they are not immediate needs. They're not even probably tier 2 needs. They're just projects that we anticipate possibly needing in the future. So this list on page 13 would be planned through regular capital planning on a year-to-year basis.
Okay.
Questions, board? Recommended projects for future resources? On projects requiring further evaluation.
And I will point out with this page that when you go back to those initial phase 1 and phase 2 lists, there was this idea almost that there were certain projects put at buildings just as a placeholder. So for example, you see a lot on this page of grass field renovations, that it wasn't an urgent need, wasn't even a middle tier priority, but as that list was being developed and wanted to make sure for the community that every building would have some projects done, some projects like that were included. And so, again, similar to the last one, these are things that still need to be looked at. They might be needed down the road. From a cost standpoint, probably not the highest end items and things that we could consider through regular capital work. And should we, estimates come in better than anticipated and there are additional progress funds available, these could be considered as well.
I'm curious, Mr. Stutzer, on things like electrical upgrades, plumbing upgrades, is that more of a preventative maintenance type thing of like outlets, receptacles, not like full rewiring the building, just the switch can go bad over time?
That's correct.
Prevent that.
Yeah, that's correct.
Other questions?
And also for clarity, I'll say that as you look through these pages, you may see where some things are duplicate, and you're right, it was listed on page 1 and then repeated on page 2 of those original messaging documents.
We're talking about a lot of page numbers and tables. These will be put up in Word docs.
Yes.
I was actually reminded of something. When I see Harvest Ridge, grass field renovations. There's a vacation station was there this past summer, and it was my first experience with that. My kids go to a different school for vacation station during the year, and the previous year went to that same school for vacation station summer. It brings me back to page 12 and 14 that we're on for Harvest Ridge grass field renovations and playground updates. Has any thought been put into somehow reworking that back there? You know, because you go in, when you pull in on the wrong side. It's like, you know, we're in England. You go in and you kind of pull back around, and then the kids are open to, you know, somebody accidentally hits the gas and they're going into the playground. There was a main concern the first time I went there, and then every time I went there were cars doing this and going around each other, and then, you know, after a couple of weeks you get used to it. But it was a very odd situation. Has any thought been put into changing that or doing something about that?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Yes, the short answer is yes, as you know, pending your direction respective to playgrounds. It's comprehensive. It's not only addressing the equipment, it's also assessing where those playgrounds currently are. What I will also share with you is we do have, you have some school sites that have 6 to 7 playgrounds, and you have some that have 2 to 3. And so the plan would be to standardize across our district. You would have K1, and then you would have 2 through 5 play structures located in. Some may be relocated to address concerns such as you point out, and then some may be relocated for drainage to address drainage.
It was, for me, it was a safety issue on both sides, for the parents that are coming in and going out and the kids once they're there. It just seemed to me like those cars are too close to those kids, and those cars are then too close to each other's cars. It seemed like it could be reworked fairly easily, and that's what reminded me of it. So that's something you guys.
It is, and our third party that provided a lot of the playground data did also note that piece.
Additional questions? Projects requiring further evaluation. Moving on. Projects no longer needed or recommended.
So I'll mention first, as you look at this, the chart is different on this particular page because a rationale column has been added, and Mr. Stutzer will be happy to answer any of your specific questions on
So there's a lot of HVAC and exterior renovations. I know you mentioned third party coming in, or those things that were identified by third parties that you had come in.
That's correct. So the third party, what they did was they really went through our entire district, and the charge and the focus was to focus on our instructional sites. So with that assessment, we basically rated 25 plus years. Then we had, so at that rating, most of those life cycle, those systems that have been in service are obsolete or expired from a life cycle standpoint. Then we went to nearing end of life, then those that are in the middle of their life. So some of the systems that you see here are in the middle of their life, and so they still have some service life left to them. And so we dropped those down to, we wouldn't recommend those at this point. Now, for example, at Henderson, obviously with the recommendation that we will bring to the March 21st board meeting to let bids for that bid package, it includes life cycle of their current existing HVAC system. So that's why we pulled it off of this list and included it in the comprehensive.
So we're collecting a lot of information there. How are we storing and tracking that information that now we are finding out through this process, through all the process, file in the drawer somewhere,
Yeah.
collecting data?
Work order system, all of that.
Exactly. So eventually, board, I believe at the December board meeting, approved Operations Hero, which is a new work order system that we will utilize district-wide. We will actually be going live shortly after spring break. And we will start inputting a lot of that data in that system. It'll also drive our preventative maintenance schedules as we build those. They will live there. So that's where we plan to house a lot of this data.
Very exciting. I mean, long needed for our system.
Remind me, is that also asset management in
That is correct.
in addition to work order?
Exactly, yeah. So our plan is to, utilize QR codes, from a preventive maintenance standpoint. And so each piece of equipment, whether it's a rooftop unit or a boiler or a chiller, will end up having a QR code. So our technicians from a preventative maintenance standpoint can scan that and perform their the preventive maintenance schedule cycle. But that is also, that tag is also part of an asset that is being tracked in the system.
Questions, board? No longer needed or recommended? All right, moving on.
Okay, so this page is the culmination of the recommendations. It includes those that are projects in progress, as well as the project recommendation, and then that deferred maintenance information. Excuse me. Mr. Stutzer has identified the target delivery for each of these, so you can have an understanding of how we believe we might approach the work. And you'll note that with regard to the deferred maintenance for the HVAC systems, we've got a phase 1 grouping followed by a phase 2 grouping. So again, reminding you that that Sager HVAC system was included within the phase 2 section of that. A reminder again that we had the 84,532,640 available PROFES funds, not encumbered. Our progress that's committed, and keep in mind that that $27,113,149 is contingent on the final pricing for Henderson and Fairmount. We're actually where we need to be with the Henderson piece, but Fairmount would still be outstanding. That then has the total of $57,491,491. That was back on the financial page that you reviewed earlier, resulting then in the projects for consideration deduction and the deferred maintenance for consideration. If all of these projects came in exactly as they are estimated currently, that would leave us with a remaining balance of $1,669,491.
Where did we get these estimates?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. These estimates were provided through the third-party vendors that we're working with. I've vetted them across the region, both on the eastern side as well as western side of the state. And also looked at data of similar projects that have recently, bids have been opened, and gathered, correlated all that data and came up with the price.
Some using the cost per square foot.
Per square foot piece.
I'm happy to share with you, this is front-loading what will be presented to you next week, but the actual construction bid, that the pricing that the Honer Group had provided us was within 40,000 of their estimate by the third party, and then the overall bid is within 105,000. So we had a great experience in receiving that final estimate. That will be presented to you next Thursday.
And I see the security vestibules on here. When's the start date on that? Do you anticipate?
It's an aggressive schedule, as we know. In fact, right now, we're already working on submittals for all the materials, everything. And so we will start as soon as school's out.
And I guess the goal is to have it completed by the time school starts.
And pending any delays with materials, we will.
Ms. Emery, you mentioned, and Director Stiglitz brought it up as well, needing to spend the money
Yes.
at a certain time.
That would be our next page.
What happens if it's not spent?
Well, and so I've been exploring that with the bond attorney. The real answer to that is that we would be at risk of our bonds not being considered tax exempt, which would affect investors in those bonds. Seeking clarity on the language indicates that it's 85% within a three-year window from when the bonds were sold. So that's why we have two different deadlines. There's also language that says intention, that your intention. Well, we could also, we've had intention of spending by those deadlines. The bottom line is that we would have to have a thorough opinion issued regarding compliance on that. And that's certainly our goal, is to be compliant. If we can get there by moving the projects forward, that's a better place to be. If you do want to turn and look at the next page, this is actually on page 17. It's basically an excerpt of 2 slides that we provided you during the September presentation. And so you see that chart where it references the 3-year spend target for 85%. We easily met the first phase, where we needed to spend $91,607,000 of the first phase issued. And currently, as it sits, we need to spend $8.5 million by March 31 of 2025. I should say, though, this is not anything we've talked with you about during the board meeting, but we have the opportunity to recode our nutrition services equipment at Francis Howell North. That's a qualifying expenditure against the food service program. And our food service program has done very well. We do have excess funds, and there is a requirement to maintain a limited fund balance there. So there would be an expectation that we would spend some of those funds towards special projects. So there could be $2 million that would be attributed to food service, which means then we need to come up with $10.5 million based on these numbers. That makes sense.
Board, I want to point out, I don't know if celebration or bright spot is the right language, but following the increased overall cost of Francis Howell North, I think we all anticipated that there would be a significant number of projects and work that would not be able to be completed now and possibly ever. And the reality is, through a combination of not needing to do the Independence and John Weldon additional classrooms, which were on there based on capacity at that time, and we know that those are not needed. So there are some projects like that we were able to easily remove based on the bond premiums that were involved. When you look at this list, a majority, a significant amount of the initial work will be completed. The projects that are recommended for not moving forward or being further evaluated, it's less about the cost cutting as it is the work that we've done to determine are they necessary, are they high priorities at this time. And so I do feel good, anticipated a year and a half ago when we started this conversation, when we would come to the board, there would be a lot of frustration and hurt feelings in the community that specific projects had to be cut or eliminated. And the reality is I think we are quite pleased with the number of projects, the scope of these projects that ultimately will be completed, and that all 23 of our school sites and our other buildings are positively being impacted, ultimately providing safe, high-quality spaces for our students and for our staff each day in the district.
curious, Mr. Stetzer, from your opinion, let's make the assumption board approves to move forward. What are your concerns about not meeting that spending goal or impediments that you are concerned that may be out there?
Out of the scopes that we've recommended, you know, my biggest concern probably lies in the mechanical scope, which really driven by lead times from a supply chain standpoint for mechanical equipment. That's still one of my biggest concerns. That's why it's really, you know, it's a 2-year sequence. So it's a combination of lead time and materials, but also it's a lot. When you try to spend almost $27 million on what really ends up being an equivalent of 140 days, you know, when I look at it, that work can only be completed from a summer month standpoint. And I always operate under the about 70 to 73 day window to start projects right after school is out, before we start having back to school meetings and teacher orientation, to where that work needs to be wrapped up. So that's really my biggest concern. But I feel pretty good that we can meet the challenge, but that's probably where we might have a little risk.
And board, I would also add to that, outside of just the scope of the work, Mr. Stutzer and his team are fantastic, but this is a significant and ambitious amount of work to complete in just several years. So the fact that we will have to utilize, whether a project manager for some of these or outside support, or a person that we would bring in-house to do it for a short period of time, that will be necessary given the significant scope of several of these projects. And that would be funded as well out of.
And without considering any of the HVAC, those projects that are in the projects recommended, that are for summer 2024, fall of 2024, those actually total $10 million. So those would actually come to fruition in terms of meeting that spending expectation.
Just real quick, thanks for all your hard work on this, you and your team, and the team, Ken as well, all the admin that were involved in this. Really appreciate pulling all that good data together.
Yeah, really big kudos to our internal team, managers, as well as our foreman. They provided a lot of really good information in terms of, it's really for Carol and I, we were kind of coming in blind on the back end in terms of what's been completed and the state of where things are at. So they were really instrumental helping us build this to prepare us to make a recommendation to you guys' consideration.
Any additional questions, board, on the cost estimates before we move on to the stop sign?
These target delivery dates, these are when the project's completed and closed out?
That is correct. That is the hope, and those, you know, it's through also working with our third parties. Realistically, you know, building a timeline in terms of, hey, if our Board of Education approved us in April to move forward, what is a realistic delivery timeline to complete these projects? And they were able to provide that feedback to us. If we end up getting any later, you know, if we get into May, June for certain approvals, it obviously impacts that.
Before we move on, I would like to say and make a comment. I think Dr. Rumpus said something a few minutes ago that I really want to reiterate, not to just our audience here, but also to our people who are watching us from home. Being on the board when we passed Prop S and saw the list of projects, and then knowing what had happened with Francis Howell North and everything, knowing that we were able to complete what is on this list is amazing. And when I look around this board at this table, there isn't anybody else sitting here that was here back then in 2020 and didn't know how long that list was. So my kudos to you, Dr. Rumpus, and to you and to Ms. Embry for making this come forward, because I don't think anybody realizes how hard that list was. I know in the last couple of years we've taken a lot of hits, but this is amazing that you were able to do this. And I personally again, want to make sure that everybody knows how much you guys have worked on this. Thank you very, very much.
Super.
Page 17. So Dr. Rompus referenced the stop signs, and we continue to bring these back to you, and these are our guiding posts, if you will. And so by bringing this information to you now, and our hope that we can bring you the official recommendation for vote at the next Thursday night's meeting, that would be honoring that stop sign number 1, step 1 of the board giving us approval to explore those items that are recommended to you for not only deferred maintenance, but those actual projects. We will continue the process much as we have before. I did reference the spending requirements already. I want to also mention that the very last page complements the stop sign page. I realize the font is very tiny. If you're looking at it online, it can be made larger for you. But basically, this document was constructed so that we could stay anchored down on those 6 points in time when we come to you and seek approval. So you will see that those correlate to the work of each of those stop signs. And what you can see here, it's labeled bond and large-scale projects, BOE approval timeline, because it would continue to be built out for any of these projects. We will construct the actual dates that we would bring it to you for initial exploration, as well as design development, schematic design, design development again, and then construction document, then authorizing us to bid the project. One thing that I will add to this document to make the font even more tiny is the anticipated completion date. I think I need to add that in as well. So.
Any additional questions for her?
Just to add to Ms. Embry just shared, there are some projects in here that we will still bring to you for board approval, but they will require very minimal design,
Right.
such as tennis courts and field turf. So those may be recommendations that we bring to you that will have very little design work to them.
We would fully communicate that this would be the actual recommendation. However, those are done. And same way for the HVAC. That will have a different approval cycle.
Great. We have a motion to move forward to step 2 for recommended best projects.
So moved.
Sure. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Ayes have it.
Oh, maybe not. We will bring this for presentation. So you're authorizing
Right.
us to bring this.
Bring it for presentation then.
Presentation at the board meeting next Thursday evening.
And since I'm not going to be at that board meeting next Thursday, I would really like to ask my fellow board members to please go ahead and approve this. You can tell that this has been done with some very hard work, and again, being on that original Prop S part of it, it's a great thing for Francis Howell moving us forward. So I would encourage everybody to please vote yes on Thursday.
In a presentation style, we'll also post this document for this meeting.
Just trying to help you out.
I know, thank you for that. We appreciate you. Yeah.
You can always utilize those first Thursday of the month meetings.
Yeah.
Quick process of approval.
All right, then board, I'd like a motion to adjourn to open session.
No, I was just to say, if you have any questions, we.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Got it.
Thinking about services, sorry, I talked about it.